What's up and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you guys are new here, then hello! My name is Erica and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we are going to be chatting about all things DIODORUS SICULUS context. Now before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. But now that you've so kindly joined this nutty little corner of the internet, let's get into the video. So DIODORUS SICULUS. This is a bit of an odd context video to upload. I'm aware that this literally doesn't exist on YouTube. Nobody has their own context video for DIODORUS SICULUS. And that is because it's incredibly difficult to piece together DIODORUS SICULUS's life. So I did just want to have a little disclaimer at the start of this video of why I wanted to upload this video, because there's not a lot to say. The reason is because I know from the outside looking in, Diodorus is not somebody that people would be familiar with. If I was walking down the street and I was like, I'm an ancient historian, Homer, Herodotus, you wouldn't add Diodorus onto the end of that to get people to go, oh, okay. However, Diodorus has an incredible work, and his book is so important that when you are within the field, when you are a nerd, it is pretty difficult to avoid at least reference to his work in your own writing. So when we are reading other historians, when we are talking about particular topics, mythical as well as historical, at some point you are going to have to say, here's the story according to this person, here's the story according to this person, and then DIODORUS SICULUS wrote this, which is different to both of them. You can't avoid that. And therefore, since we're all now ancient historians, I am now making you an ancient historian as well. That's my whole mission, is to make everybody a nerd. At some point you will have to read Diodorus, and so we might as well put this up here. However, this will probably be the last text that I'll be going into in depth. So after all these context videos will come breakdowns of the text, and I have to say that Diodorus will be one of the last ones that I tackle, because he is not one of the ones that you need to read until you've done everything else, is my advice. So, in saying all of that, who is Diodorus? DIODORUS SICULUS, that phrasing, his name is Diodorus, and Siculus just means of Sicily, right? So Diodorus was living in Sicily, here on a map more specifically, and he was prominent during the 1st century BC. Now, little to nothing is known about his life. Literally nothing. Less than I have ever known about anybody else that we've discussed on this channel. Historians are like, Diodorus, nope, nothing. So therefore, there's really nothing to say in this context video, so I thought that I would take the time to talk about his work and why it's so important and why it is unavoidable when you're writing your own work and contrasting and comparing stories and looking at different historiographies as well as different mythic accounts from the ancient world. What we do know about him, aside from that he's Sicilian, which is great, right? You guys are always asking if I'm Italian because I move my arms around a lot. Sicilian, hello! My mum is Sicilian and my grandparents are Sicilian. They grew up my grandparents lived in a very small town in the south of Sicily, and my mum spent a significant chunk of her life in this small town before moving to the US, hence my funky accent. I do not speak Italian, no one asked me, but regardless of that, he's from Sicily, and we know that he was prominent during the 1st century BC because of the dating of the accounts that he writes about. That sounds a little bit weird. What I mean by that is that because he wrote this incredible text that does dive into mythology and to history, all of that, which I will expand upon in a hot second, it really ends in 60 BC. So that narrative ends in 60 BC. So historians then believe, due to, again, the little rumblings that come from the ancient world, that he was living and was actually prospering during the times of Julius Caesar and Augustus, probably very early Augustus. Now, Diodorus has his one big text, and this is an absolute mammoth of a piece of writing. This work is called the Bibliotheki in Greek, or in Latin, the Bibliotheca Historica, but to us it is known as the Universal History. And this book is unbelievably special because what Diodorus set out to do was to tell the history. Bear in mind, this is the Roman Republic, very early Roman Empire, depending on how far he's into Augustus' reign, because that's the tipping point, in case you guys don't know. It's Julius Caesar to Augustus is the Roman Republic to the empire. And so therefore he's telling the history of Rome and the mythology of Rome, but he does that in a specifically history kind of way. And so therefore, when we're looking at the mythology, he's grounding all of the mythology in realism, he's grounding all the mythology in this is our founding story, and then explains all of the history up until 60 BC. Now, obviously, as you guys should be aware of by now, not all of that survives, because that was totaling 40 books, right? And when I say books, remember I mean chapters. So 40 books. It's a thick boy. And not all of that survives because we could never be so spoiled from the ancient world. Why would we be? Only books 1 to 5 survive, along with books 11 to 20. But what's really interesting about these 40 books is that they were technically broken up into thirds. So even though we have like the individual books, the individual chapters telling us different parts, it was technically, I don't want to say it's a trilogy because I don't want you to view it that way, but at the same time, mentally think of it that way, right? So we have these 3 sections of the text, despite it totaling 40 books. So what are those 3 sections? The first section, which is books 1 to 6, talk about the mythic history of the non-Hellenic and Hellenic tribes to the destruction of Troy, right? So this is sort of encompassing everybody that he kind of get his hands on, right, about the history of it, but the mythical side as a history. Books 7 to 17 move into the history side of things, and they talk about everything up until Alexander the Great's death. And then books 18 to 40 continue the history as far as the beginning of Caesar's Gallic Wars, like I said, in about 60 BC. Now, books 11 to 20 are from both the second and third parts. So they specifically cover around 480 BC to around 302 BC, right? So that's how we kind of know what these books were encompassing. Now, to get a little bit more specific, I did make a list of what each and every book is. So for the nerds that really want to know before diving into the book, let's go. Book 1, the myths, kings, and customs of Egypt. Book 2, the history of Assyria, description of India, Scythia, Arabia, and the islands of the ocean. Now, book 3 are then the Ethiopians, Amazons of Africa, the inhabitants of Atlantis, and the origins of the first gods. Book 4 goes into more of the mythological side of things, but again, we are grounding it in realism, so we do the main Greek gods, we talk about the Argonauts, Theseus, the 7 against Thebes. I've already discussed 7 against Thebes from Aeschylus, the mythological play story that is written by Aeschylus. That's already been discussed on the channel, if you guys want more information about that. We then have book 5 that was talking about the islands and the peoples of the West, Rhodes, and Crete. Then books 6 to 10, like I said, they're only fragments, right? But we know that these fragments are specifically from the Trojan War all the way down to 480 BC. So there's like a lot that goes on. If you guys don't know, the Trojan War is set in Mycenaean times, right? So we're going back to like the 1000s, guys, and it goes all the way down to 480 BC. Not the war, the books. The war is just in the Mycenaean times. Book 11 is 480 to 451 BC, 12 is 450 to 416 BC, 13 is 415 to 405 BC, 14, 404 to 387 BC, 15 is 386 to 361 BC, 16, 360 to 336 BC, 17, 335 to 324 BC, 18, 323 to 318 BC, 19, 317 to 311, 20, 310 to 302, and as you guys can guess, from that point all the way to book 40 are just fragments, and they are the years 301 down to 60. So like I said, this is a big boy. It tends to be a very important text that we refer to not only for mythological sources, but also for historical sources, because Diodorus just decided one day he was going to write everything, which I massively, massively respect. Now, even though we know absolutely nothing pretty much about Diodorus Siculus himself, what is really important to highlight is the main criticism of the text, because again, as I always want to highlight to you guys, yeah, we can read all of these texts and they can be fabulous, but the key to being a historian is to read and to make sure that you are kind of trusting it, but also distrusting it at the exact same time. You kind of have to take a lot of the stuff at face value, but you have to be aware that you're trusting it because there's nothing else really, and there's no like newspapers that we have like in the modern day, there's no social media updates, there's none of that, so you have to read everything going, where there's smoke, there's fire, but is it 100%? Probably not. Now, when it comes to Diodorus in particular, obviously, as I keep mentioning, the big issue that lots of people critique in the ancient times is that he is taking a lot of mythology and he's trying to make it history. And therefore, because he's doing that, it is pretty impossible to write both something that is historically accurate and mythologically accurate at the same time. Which means that when we read this, we really have to be aware that both parts of the story are going to have to suffer ever so slightly to make this narrative work. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's still a very enjoyable read. It's still some very important points that are made. I love it when people take mythology and they try and ground it in realism. Like, if you think even in modern times, we do that so much now with the Greek mythology retellings booming. People are taking it and grounding it. Mark Knowles is a great example of this. He's someone that did Jason and the Argonauts as historical fiction. Would recommend. I think it's a series that is absolutely slept on. But what I'm trying to say is that even though this guy is from the ancient world, you cannot, under any circumstances, sit there and say, well, because Diodorus said this, it's probably true. That's not how being a historian works. What happens is that we need to be aware that there is this push and pull of the history and the mythology side of Diodorus's work. And so we say, this is another option, which means it's gonna, like, the truth of the matter is gonna be somewhere in the middle of it. Whatever it is that they've all said probably happened, but if one person has said something and somebody else hasn't mentioned it, again, grain of salt with everything. That's the fun part. When you're a historian, you get to kind of piece together this puzzle of the ancient world and try and figure out what pieces fit together the best. However, in saying that, Diodorus is incredible at sourcing. So this is a fantastic place that historians have been able to actually piece together a lot of other, like, fragmentary parts of lost works. He's incredible at saying, I got this from this person, though not direct quotes, which is kind of slightly annoying. He just kind of gives us the general gist of, according to this person about this instance, da-da-da-da-da, and he'll say, like, you know, from whatever it is. And so on that front, it's fantastic, although obviously because we are always looking for more as ancient historians, we're like, oh, why weren't you quoting? But at the same time, beggars can't be choosers, and we love that he actually spent the time to be so concise about his sourcing, which is a phenomenal gift from the ancient world. But that is as long as this video is going to be. It is pretty short. I just wanted to give you guys an introduction to Diodorus and make sure that you guys know if we're going on this journey of reading the historians, if you guys are wanting to kind of in your own time get more familiar, to kind of graduate into being more so like a I guess, more traditional historian rather than just an internet historian, Diodorus will be one that you will have to have. I've linked a lot of Diodorus, whether it be translations online or translations that you can purchase, because you can actually find most of these ancient sources for free online. People don't realize that. But they're all linked in the description below, so you guys can decide if you want your physical copy that you'll have to buy, or if you want your online copy as a place to kind of refer to. And hopefully this will open up many a door when you are actually reading these modern histories that are, or modern historians that are writing about the ancient world. We're constantly mentioning Diodorus, you now know. But with that, I will love you and leave you with this very, very basic introduction to Diodorus. Thank you guys so much, and I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you guys then.